To understand Bir Hakeim, you have to understand the Gazala Line. By February 1942, the British 8th Army under General Neil Ritchie had dug in along a 50-mile arc south of the Libyan coast, anchored on the fortified port of Tobruk in the north and trailing south into open desert. The line was not continuous. It was a string of brigade-sized defensive boxes, minefields, wire, dug-in artillery, separated by miles of nothing. The southernmost box, the hinge of the entire Allied position, was Bir Hakeim, a bone-dry well in a flat plain of yellow stone and scorpions, 235 kilometers southwest of Tobruk. Coordinates: 31 degrees 36 minutes north, 23 degrees 29 minutes east. Garrisoning it, the 1st Free French Brigade, 3,723 men. Their commander, Brigadier General Marie-Pierre Koenig, was a 43-year-old career soldier from Caen who had lost the use of one arm fighting in Norway in 1940. He had refused to surrender after the fall of France, escaped to London, and now commanded a brigade of men who in many cases had no country to go home to. The 13th Demi-Brigade of the Foreign Legion, the Battalion of the Pacific, Bataillon de Marque No. 2 from Albenguichari. A company of Jewish volunteers from Mandatory Palestine, even a few Spanish Republican exiles still fighting fascism 4 years after their own war ended. They had crossed Africa to be here. They had nowhere left to retreat. Rommel's plan, codenamed Operation Venezia, was elegant and brutal. While Italian infantry pinned the British in the north, his 3 armored divisions, the 15th Panzer, 21st Panzer, and 90th Light, joined by the Italian Ariete and Trieste, would sweep south around the Gazala line, hook behind it, and crush the 8th Army from the rear. Bir Hakeim sat directly in the path of that hook. Rommel assigned the task of eliminating it to the Italian Ariete Armored Division. He estimated it would take a quarter of a day. But here is what the standard histories leave out. Koenig had been preparing for months. 500,000 mines laid in irregular belts, sunken artillery positions invisible at 300 meters, 63 anti-tank guns, French 75s, captured Italian 47s, British 2-pounders sighted not for defense in depth, but for kill zones. Every gun crew knew the precise range to every gap in the minefield. The Free French were not waiting to die. They were waiting to invoice the desert. At 06:30 on May 27th, the Ariete Division's M1340 tanks rolled toward Bir Hakeim from the southeast. 32 tanks in the lead wave. They expected a quick capitulation. What they got was a French 75 round through the lead tank's turret at 400 meters, fired by Lieutenant Bricogny of the 1st Free French Artillery Regiment. Within 90 minutes, 32 Italian tanks were burning in the minefield. 91 prisoners walked into the French wire with their hands above their heads. The Ariete recoiled. Rommel, monitoring from his command vehicle north of Bir Hakeim, was furious but unconcerned. He had a battle to fight to the east. He left Bir Hakeim sealed off and pushed his panzers deep into the British rear. And here is the turning point, the decision that changed everything, not a French decision, Rommel's. By June 1st, the Desert Fox's offensive had stalled in what the British were calling the Cauldron, a pocket of Allied minefields and counterattacking armor that was bleeding his panzers dry. Rommel needed his supply lines opened. He needed the southern hinge of the Gazala line gone. He needed Bir Hakeim erased. So he did something he almost never did. He turned around. On June 2nd, Rommel personally took command of the assault on Bir Hakeim. He brought the 90th Light Division, the Trieste, elements of the 15th Panzer, Stuka dive bombers from Fliegerkorps X, and over 300 guns. Total assaulting force, roughly 37,000 men against 3,700. If this is landing, save this video, you will want to come back to this one, because what happened next is one of the most extraordinary defensive stands in the history of mechanized warfare. For 9 days, the Stukas came. June 3rd, June 4th. June 5th, Pierre Mesmer, then a Legion captain, later Prime Minister of France, wrote that the bombing was so constant the men stopped flinching. They simply ate sand and waited for it to stop. It did not stop. The wells dried. Water was cut to 1 canteen per man per day, then half a canteen. The wounded in Dr. Violard Gaudou's field hospital, a hole in the ground covered by a tarp, drank from bandages. Senegalese gunners of the 1st Marching Regiment kept firing through bombing runs that buried them alive twice. Lieutenant Dewey of the 2nd Foreign Legion Battalion held a salient on the northeast face with 12 men against an infantry battalion, and held it for 3 days, until he was killed standing on the parapet directing fire with a Lebel rifle. We will get to the moment Koenig himself ordered the Breakout stay with me, because the night they walked out of Bir Hakeim shocked even the German officers tracking them. Rommel sent 2 emissaries under flags of truce demanding surrender. June 3rd, an Italian officer. June 8th, a German major. Koenig refused both. To the German, he sent back a single line: "We have not come this far to surrender." Hitler personally ordered that any Frenchman captured at Bir Hakeim be executed within 24 hours as a Franc-tireur, a terrorist, not a soldier. The order was issued because of Bir Hakeim. It was never carried out. Rommel quietly suppressed it. By June 10th, the situation inside the perimeter was untenable. Ammunition was almost gone. The 75mm battery had 80 rounds left across all guns. Water was effectively zero. Men were licking dew-off radio antennas at dawn. The wounded numbered in the hundreds. Stukas were back over the position at first light every day, and the strategic mission was complete. The 8th Army had used the 15 days of Bir Hakeim's defense to extract its surviving armor from the Cauldron and begin its retreat to the Egyptian frontier. Koenig had bought Ritchie his withdrawal. Now Koenig had to save his brigade. That night, the night of June 10th into June 11th, Marie-Pierre Koenig gave the order historians still debate. Not a fighting retreat, a walkout. At 23:00 hours, sappers of the Foreign Legion crawled into the minefield on the southwest face and cleared 2 narrow lanes marked with tape and tin cans. At 23:30, the British 7th Motor Brigade, waiting 8 kilometers to the south, opened a corridor with mobile columns of Crusader tanks. And at midnight, in total silence, 3,700 Free French soldiers walked out of Bir Hakeim, on foot, in trucks, in ambulances, carrying their wounded. The Germans heard them before they saw them. Flares went up. Machine guns opened on fixed lines. The 90th Light Division mounted a hasty pursuit. The Breakout dissolved into a running night battle across 8 kilometers of open desert. Koenig himself drove a Ford staff car through the German lines with his English driver and liaison officer Susan Travers, the only woman ever officially admitted to the French Foreign Legion, who would later be decorated with the Croix de Guerre for that drive. 11 bullet holes in the car, none in her. When dawn broke on June 11th, the count was made at the British rendezvous point at Bir el Gobi. Of the 3,723 men who had entered Bir Hakeim, 2,619 had made it out. Brigade casualties, killed, wounded, captured, totaled just over 1,000. Against an attacking force 10 times their size, supported by armor and dive bombers with no air cover of their own, the Free French had inflicted roughly 3,300 casualties on Rommel, destroyed 51 Axis tanks, and held the southern hinge of the Gazala line for exactly 15 days. That night, Koenig sent a single signal to British XIII Corps. Bir Hakeim evacuated as ordered, bringing out 2/3, request rations and water for 1,000 wounded. But the consequences of those 15 days had only begun. Strategically, the cost to Rommel was catastrophic. He had spent 15 irreplaceable days, and the ammunition, fuel, and aircraft hours that went with them, reducing a single brigade. Those 15 days allowed the British 8th Army to retreat in order rather than disintegration. 3 weeks later, when Rommel finally reached El Alamein in early July 1942, his Panzer Army was exhausted, undersupplied, and badly degraded. Auchinleck stopped him at 1st Alamein. Montgomery destroyed him at 2nd Alamein in November. Many British and German historians, including the German official history of the war, draw a direct line from the delay at Bir Hakeim to the failure of the Axis to reach the Nile. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring later wrote that Bir Hakeim was the most expensive secondary objective of the entire campaign. Politically, the effect was even greater. On June 12th, the day after the breakout, the BBC announced from London that French troops had held Bir Hakeim for 15 days against Rommel's main effort. The German High Command, in its daily communiqué, confirmed it and called the defenders for the first time soldiers, not terrorists, not rebels, soldiers. General Charles de Gaulle, listening in his office at Carlton Gardens, wept. He told his aide-de-camp Geoffrey de Kersel that night, when at Bir Hakeim a ray of her resurgent glory came to caress the bloodied brow of her soldiers, the world recognized France. 6 weeks earlier, Free France had been a slogan and a flag. After Bir Hakeim, Free France was an army. Within 18 months, those same men would land in Provence, liberate Toulon, fight up the Rhone, and march into Strasbourg behind Leclerc. The road from Paris to Berlin began at a dry well in Libya. Even Hitler acknowledged it. On June 16th, in a speech to officers at Rastenburg, he called the defenders of Bir Hakeim, quote, "the second best soldiers in the world after our own." It was the only recorded compliment he ever paid to French arms, and here is the detail that gets cut from most accounts. When the German cemetery teams went into the perimeter after the French departure, they found the bodies of foreign legionnaires of every nationality, Germans, Austrians, Czechs, Poles, men fighting under French colors against the regime that had occupied their countries. The Germans buried them with full military honors. Even the Wehrmacht understood what had happened in those 15 days. CTA 1213 Min. If this is the kind of military history you came here for, the specific decisions, the named commanders, the moments where the textbooks stop short, subscribe to WarDossier and hit the bell icon. New battle every Wednesday. Drop in the comments. Was Koenig right to break out on the night of June 10th, or should he have held one more day? Which side do you think showed the better strategy at Bir Hakeim? Rommel for committing the resources, or Koenig for refusing to spend his men cheaply? Outro 1315 Min. The lesson of Bir Hakeim is the oldest lesson in war, and the one commanders most often forget. Terrain that does not matter on a map can decide a campaign. Rommel was right that Bir Hakeim was a secondary objective. He was right that the prize was the 8th Army and the Suez Canal. But he was wrong about the cost of taking the secondary objective. He paid 15 days he could not afford for a position he did not need, against an enemy he had underestimated, and that miscalculation cascaded all the way to El Alamein. Marie-Pierre Koenig died a Marshal of France in 1970. The men of the 1st Free French Brigade went on to fight in Tunisia, in Italy, in Provence, in the Vosges, and finally in Germany. Many of the foreign legionnaires never went home. They had no home to go to. They are buried in the sand at Bir Hakeim, where the Ottoman well still stands dry, and the minefields still claim the occasional camel. If this one hit, my video on Rommel's last day at El Alamein, where he was ordered to hold to the last man and chose to disobey Hitler instead, will blow your mind. That is the battle where the Desert Fox's reputation died, and the decision that put him on the road to Stauffenberg's bomb plot. Watch that one next. In May 1942, 3,723 Free French soldiers under Brigadier General Marie-Pierre Koenig held the desert fortress of Bir Hakeim against 37,000 Axis troops under Field Marshal Erwin Rommel for 15 days. They were foreign legionnaires, Senegalese Touralours, Pacific Islanders, Spanish Republican exiles, and Jewish volunteers from Mandatory Palestine. They had no air cover, no fresh water, and no reinforcements. They were the southern hinge of the Gazala line, and the fate of the British 8th Army depended on them. This is the full story of how Koenig's brigade ground Rommel's offensive to a halt, why those 15 days saved the Allied position in North Africa, and how the night breakout of June 10th-11th, 1942, became the moment Free France ceased to be a slogan and became an army. Chapters 00, 00 the stake in the sand 03, 00 the Cauldron and the Fox's mistake 06, 00 the Breakout 09, 00 the Shadow of Bir Hakeim 12, 00 subscribe and comment 13, 00 the Legacy new battle every Wednesday. Subscribe and hit the bell icon.